654 victims vanished without records, 268 children found inside a single hangar, and a private airport that turned humanitarian flights into a trafficking pipeline for 6 years. This is the story of how Detroit Metropolitan International became a gateway to disappearance, and how federal agents shut it down across 3 continents in a single night. January 2nd, 2025, 4:15 a.m., Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport. The night air was cold and silent. Federal vehicles rolled into position, doors were breached, flashlights cut through darkness. When FBI and ICE agents stepped inside, they did not find aircraft preparing for humanitarian flights. They walked straight into a hidden crime scene. If you believe stories like this should never be hidden, tap like now and comment justice to help more people see this investigation. Behind the steel doors of hangar LC-47, agents opened 12 shipping containers. Inside were 268 children, frightened, silent, tightly packed together, waiting to be loaded onto a charter plane headed overseas. Records found at the scene showed a larger network, 654 victims tied to the same trafficking pipeline, from Somalia to Mexico to China. The airport was owned and operated by David Thomas Reynolds, age 52, and his Somali wife, Safia Ali Warsame, age 39, a couple trusted by the community, but with secret ties to Los Zetas gang. On the office wall hung a single photograph, Governor Richard A. Whitcomb, crossed out in red ink, and next to it, one word, eliminated. Type gateway. If you're starting to see, this wasn't just an airport, it was infrastructure. The files revealed everything. By mid-morning, investigators began tracing what Liberty Cross truly was. Not an airport, but a gateway in a silent network. Inside the operations office, agents uncovered flight manifests, shipping rosters, financial ledgers covering 6 years of private departures. None of the flights were listed in public aviation records. Every route followed the same path, Detroit to Tijuana, then across the Pacific to Chinese industrial zones. Passenger names did not appear in immigration databases. Instead, they were marked with coded labels, transit only, no return, cleared for transfer. The evidence showed that children and adults were not being relocated. They were being moved like inventory. A confidential witness confirmed the truth. He was a U.S. Army veteran, rescued months earlier after escaping forced labor in a Chinese factory. His testimony matched the airport files exactly. The same route, the same holding process, the same false promises of education and work. Financial records tied the operation directly to David Reynolds and Safia Warsame, revealing offshore accounts, cartel payments, coordinated logistics across 3 continents. It was a system carefully built, deliberately hidden, and running in plain sight. Comment protect if you think no child should ever be treated like inventory. The timeline showed systematic processing. As federal analysts reconstructed the timeline, a darker picture emerged. Every month, 3 to 5 charter flights departed under special clearance codes. Cargo areas were sealed before inspection. Manifests listed aid recipients, but none could be traced to real addresses or families. More than 2,100 individuals processed through the airport simply vanished from every government record. Not deported, not relocated, erased. The logistics network was vast. 14 shell logistics companies, 7 offshore corporate fronts, 3 private aviation security firms, all controlled by Reynolds and Warsame. Internal correspondence described Minneapolis as the clean route, the pipeline where victims had no relatives nearby, no paper trail, no one who would come looking. As investigators followed the missing names, 2 locations remained active: a cartel-controlled airstrip in Tijuana and a restricted industrial compound in Guangdong. Intelligence confirmed hostages were still inside, guarded and prepared for removal. Diplomatic negotiations had delayed action, but new movement logs showed their status changed to final transfer, immediate. Analysts warned that once they were moved, they would vanish permanently, beyond jurisdiction, beyond rescue. At that moment, hesitation was no longer an option. Type rescue if you support the agents who refused to hesitate. January 8th, 2026 was the day the pipeline could no longer hide. At 4:12 a.m. Eastern Time, inside a secured federal command room, FBI Joint Operations Command, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, and U.S. interagency partners locked into a single mission network. Across the digital map, 3 continents were connected by one line, the route that had taken so many people away in silence. The mission order was brief: stop the transfers, rescue the living, shut the pipeline down. 4:37 a.m., Tijuana, Mexico. The first strike team moved on a private cartel airstrip outside Tijuana, a site registered as agricultural cargo logistics. But infrared surveillance confirmed what paperwork concealed. It was a transit gate for human shipments. 3 cargo planes waited on the dark runway, rear ramps open, cargo lights burning. When U.S. coordinated units advanced, cartel lookouts broke from the shadows. Radio traffic surged as FBI tactical advisors coordinated ground movement with Mexican federal forces. Vehicles locked escape points. Armed resistance escalated for 18 tense minutes. The runway turned into a battlefield of survival, agents moving under floodlights, perimeter teams blocking flight paths, medics staged behind armored vehicles. A steel hangar beneath the tower was breached. Inside were rows of men, women, and children, exhausted, silent, tagged for departure. And behind them, stacked along the rear wall, was the truth the paperwork tried to hide: compressed narcotics bricks wrapped in heat-sealed plastic, industrial chemical drums marked with falsified export labels, ledger crates stamped with cartel routing codes. It was not a cargo terminal. It was a transit hub for people and for product. Some victims had been there weeks, others longer. The manifests listed destinations, never names. Comment Tijuana if you believe every victim deserves a name, not a number. The second strike happened simultaneously. 5:06 a.m. Pacific Time, Guangdong Province, China. Thousands of miles away, a second coordinated operation unfolded. The target, an industrial complex registered as a recycling facility. But aerial thermal scans showed machinery running through the night and movement on every level. Inside, reality was brutal. Concrete corridors, chemical processing floors, workers monitored by cameras and supervisors. Shift logs showed 16 to 18-hour cycles. No contracts, no payroll, no exit entries. Those who collapsed were replaced. Those who resisted vanished. In a sealed, lower-level bay, labeled Maintenance Storage C9, investigators forced open, reinforced doors. Inside, they found children's clothing, sedatives, and injection kits, bedding on concrete floors. A board labeled Departures Cleared. It was not storage, it was containment. Rescue teams advanced slowly, floor by floor, because a rushed move meant lives at risk. Many victims were too weak to speak. Others trembled, unsure whether this was freedom or another transfer. For the first time, the scale was undeniable. Minneapolis was not the destination. It was the starting gate. Type starting gate. If you understand this pipeline stretched across the world, the numbers were devastating. 6:28 a.m. Back in Detroit, FBI command confirmed final counts. 214 victims rescued at the Tijuana airstrip. Over 320 captives secured inside the Guangdong facility. Additional movement routes identified along the chain. Across the operations channel, one message repeated: "They're alive. We have them." No one cheered. There was no victory in what they had found. Only the weight of how close these people had come to disappearing forever. The pipeline had been built to run quietly, profitable, invisible, relentless. On January 8, 2026, for the first time, it was stopped. Comment rescue matters. If you respect the courage of officers who risked everything, the vault revealed the system's depth. When the sun rose over Detroit on January 9, 2026, Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport was no longer a private aviation hub. It was a sealed federal crime scene. While rescue teams worked quietly inside the hangars, a different kind of effort unfolded across the upper floor offices. Inside the administrative wing, agents located a reinforced vault door, hidden behind a decorative wall panel. The wiring was routed through an independent security circuit, separate from the rest of the airport systems, a sign that whatever was behind it was never intended to be seen. The vault was opened at 9:42 a.m. Inside were 9 encrypted hard drives, dozens of sealed financial binders, metal cases filled with passports and identity fragments, and a series of red-tagged folders labeled LC Pipeline. The documents did not describe an airport. They described an operation. Each binder logged flight cycles, transit staging, staffing rosters, clearance approvals. But what struck investigators most was the language: cold, procedural, entirely absent of human reference. Victims were not listed as people. They were categorized as units, transfers, and inventory classes. Some files carried a chilling notation: permanent transfer, no domestic record. Cross-referencing revealed a second layer of tracking, one reserved for cases that would leave no trace inside the United States. Those names simply stopped appearing after departure dates. There were hundreds of them. The vault also contained a wall-sized photo layout, surveillance stills, travel routes, payment confirmations, and at the center, a portrait of Governor Richard A. Whitcomb, crossed through in red marker. Below the image, taped to the frame, was a handwritten note: risk contact with investigators. Status resolved. It was not speculation. It was admission. Type admission. If you believe evidence like this cannot be ignored, the financial trail exposed 3 continents. Financial statements tied offshore accounts to shell aviation firms, logistics fronts, private cargo vendors across 3 continents. Internal memoranda described Detroit as the most stable corridor. Minimal oversight, minimal inquiry. Other notes showed instructions to target individuals without close family contact, without medical documentation, without legal advocates. Victims who would not be missed, at least on paper. In a separate case box, agents discovered duplicate forms bearing humanitarian relief logos, the same designs used to reassure families overseas that their loved ones were being sent to education programs or work training abroad. The signatures were repeated, the dates were recycled. None of the programs existed. As analysts reconstructed the records, one conclusion became inescapable: this was not opportunistic crime. It was infrastructure. It had budgets, departments, audits, succession plans. It was built to survive leadership changes, investigations, even public scrutiny, because from the beginning, the system had been designed to look legitimate. And for 6 years, it had. The final discovery came late in the afternoon, a classified index listing past transfers categorized by region. Some names were marked recovered, many were not. One column carried a single devastating word: unreturned. The files did not simply reveal a network, they revealed the cost of silence and the quiet, careful, calculated way an entire world of people had been made to disappear, not in chaos, but on paper. Comment: unreturned. If this word breaks your heart like it broke theirs, the survivors faced a long road. By the time federal teams completed their first full review, the numbers no longer looked like statistics on a page. They felt like lives suspended between disappearance and survival. Across 3 locations, Detroit, Tijuana, and Guangdong, joint U.S. and partner agencies carefully documented every person who had been trapped inside the Liberty Cross network. The preliminary count confirmed 654 victims tied to the pipeline, including 268 children found inside the airport hangar and hundreds more rescued during coordinated operations overseas. But with every new file examined, the same painful truth appeared again and again: long journeys, broken promises, and families who never received answers. Many of the rescued victims spoke softly, their voices thin from exhaustion. Some had not heard their own language in months. Others struggled to remember the day they were taken, because time inside captivity did not move in weeks or seasons. It moved in shifts, in labor cycles. In waiting, medical teams reported severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, deep anxiety, signs of prolonged sleep deprivation. Some children did not cry. They simply held on to the nearest adult and refused to let go. For investigators, the most difficult question was not how many people had been saved, but how many had never returned. Cross-border coordination confirmed what the vault records had already suggested. Over the 6-year period of operation, large portions of earlier transfers were unaccounted for. Some individuals had resurfaced in distant regions. Some had been lost entirely, and some had disappeared into places without records, without oversight, without witnesses. Type: remember if you believe the unreturned deserve to be remembered. Families waited for calls that never came. Where possible, families overseas were contacted through translators and humanitarian partners. Many had believed their loved ones were already living safely in the United States, working, studying, beginning new lives. They had waited years for phone calls that never came. Now they understood why. Case summaries revealed the same story repeated again and again. Promises of education, promises of sponsorship, promises of opportunity, followed by silence. The greatest harm was not only what had happened physically, but the trust that had been taken away. Communities had believed in charity, parents had believed in hope, people had believed they were sending loved ones toward safety, not toward disappearance. Federal officials moved with care. Every rescued person was treated not as a case number, but as a survivor. Emergency shelters were prepared. Medical screenings were prioritized. Quiet rooms were offered to those who could not yet speak. Legal teams began securing humanitarian protections and long-term support. There were no speeches inside the response centers, no applause, no celebration, only quiet work, patient work, respectful work. Because the story of Liberty Cross was never only about the criminals who built the system. It was about the people who lived inside it. And the question that lingered at every briefing: if 654 victims had been traced to this single route, how many more had passed through it without records, without rescue, without anyone left to say their name? Comment 654 if you want this number to mean something more than a statistic. The system had hidden in plain sight. For the first time, the nation was forced to confront a truth that did not feel distant. It had not happened in far-off places. It had happened beside familiar roads, beneath office floors. Inside a private airport, people drove past every day, never knowing what was hidden behind its walls. By the end of the federal review period, the question was no longer how the network operated. The question was how it had been able to exist for so long without being challenged. The investigation into Liberty Cross did not only expose a trafficking route, it exposed the weaknesses around it: structural, bureaucratic, and human. For 6 years, the airport functioned under a label that drew little suspicion: private humanitarian transport operations. It fell into a narrow space between aviation oversight, nonprofit regulation, and international logistics review, a space where many agencies assumed another office was already watching. No one saw the whole picture. Private aviation cargo screening was designed for contraband detection, not for identifying people hidden behind legitimate paperwork. Humanitarian transport waivers were processed on trust, often expedited to avoid delaying relief shipments. And because the Detroit Metropolitan handled international departures rather than arrivals, fewer domestic databases flagged missing record trails. Nothing appeared illegal until it was too late. Local communities had trusted the image of the airport. Corporate filings looked legitimate. Public events presented the owners as benefactors. Grants and sponsorships framed their work as global outreach. And in many ways, that was the most painful realization. The system had not collapsed because no one cared. It collapsed because everyone believed what they were supposed to believe. Type credibility. If you understand the system hid in respectability, not shadows. Policy reforms began immediately. Review boards later wrote that Liberty Cross did not hide in shadows. It hid in credibility. The network survived not through force alone, but through professional language, polished documentation, and the absence of immediate harm visible to the public eye. Behind every gap in oversight was a human consequence. Behind every unchecked signature, a person disappeared. Policy reforms began to form in response. Tighter review for private international cargo flights, cross-agency verification of humanitarian transport programs, shared data systems for missing identity matches, greater accountability requirements for charitable entities operating across borders.